स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतङ्गमय। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। Let us offer our salutations to Sri Ramakrishna, the embodiment of all religions, the Supreme God Incarnate. Let us pray to the Divine Spirit, the sum total of all spirits, the sum total of all souls, to lead us from unreal to the real, to lead us from darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge, to lead us from death to immortality. Today I am speaking on the subject Dynamic Teachings of Swami Vivekananda. Very recently on Friday we celebrated Swami Vivekananda's birthday. It was a unique occasion to pay our great homage to this great saint. It is Vivekananda who stirred the whole world, who tried to remove all blind beliefs and superstitions, bigotry and fanaticism. People suffer because of these things. As long as there is superstition, as long as there is blind belief, as long as there is fanaticism and bigotry, suffering will be very much present there. You can never get out of suffering. You must open yourself properly. You must try to analyze, understand and practice in life if you really want to get out of suffering. Swami Vivekananda came to give this most saving message, the message of Vedanta, the teachings of the Upanishads, the most fantastic, most inspiring teaching. The teachings of Upanishads, they are the light of knowledge. Bring the light. Darkness instantly vanishes. Swami Vivekananda has brought that light. So, his life itself is dynamic. His life itself will teach us in a very significant way. His main mission was bringing God to man and awakening man to God. It's very important, please note that. Bringing God to man and awakening man to God. That was his message. If you hear this message, if you practice his instructions, you are bound to enjoy immense peace and bliss. Ramakrishna, Holy Mother Sri Sharda Devi, Vivekananda, these three in one. It's a constellation phenomenon, a phenomenon of incarnated divinity, unique so far as we know in the whole history of mankind. Nothing that Swamiji said is a casual remark. Everything, whatever he has said, has the deepest significance, because it is God's voice speaking to our age. Is it ever possible to describe Swami Vivekananda's personality? He was not a single kind of man, but was the totality of mankind in one. The potential of mankind realized in human flesh. Ordinary men realize in their lives only a few qualities of the universal man. But Swamiji realized all possible qualities to the maximum degree. Ordinary men with their single-track minds can be compared to flashlights or at most searchlights that send out a single beam in one direction. But Swamiji was like the sun, shining in all directions at once. To our single-track minds, he may appear contradictory, but in him, these contradictions are only seeming contradictions, complementary qualities and meanings, not outright logical contradictions. Thus he lived and taught not one path or yoga exclusively, not even one path predominantly, but all paths in one. He did not slight one path for another. He was not lacking in reason. He was not lacking in emotion. He was not lacking in action, nor in meditation. But he taught to both East and West the equal practice of all four paths, as far as such practice is possible for each individual. And in him, this practice became the absolute fusion of the four paths into one. Reason without love is dry. Reason without action is impractical. Reason without meditation is ineffectual. And so, one could go through each path showing how each lacks something essential of the others, if the others are missing. Thus, like a four-faced divinity, Swamiji looked in all directions at once and was a whole man and taught others to be whole. There was an air of divinity about him. Swami Vivekananda was an extraordinary person. Sri Ramakrishna himself recognized special features in Vivekananda. He immediately found out that he was a person to give message to the whole world. He was a person through whom Sri Ramakrishna's message would be conveyed to all the beings. It was through him the message of harmony and integration would be conveyed to everyone in this world. Whoever had seen Swami Vivekananda, he has felt he was a divine person. No one near him could avoid feeling the force of his divine power, almost like a shock wave. Yet, through all this extraordinary nimbus of vibrant power that seemed to envelop him in a cloud of fire, there hovered an infinite gentleness too, like the sleeping sea, like the sunlight, like moonlight on snowy peaks. Swami Vivekananda's personality was like that. He was a poised thunderbolt, forever humming an immortal song, like a murmuring stream. He radiated this singing power as the sun shines. It made his abstract intellectual teachings visible, almost palpable. When he spoke of the soul and of God, the superconscious experience behind these words could be felt by everyone, and everyone's mind became permanently expanded and changed. Only a divine incarnation could do this as completely as he did. Swami Vivekananda. He was a divine incarnation, as were Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. But he was a divine incarnation in his own right, not just moon shining by a borrowed light. Every day and every moment he proved to his companions, his friends, his hearers and his disciples. He used his divine powers only for the good of mankind. It was so spontaneous. He was not to struggle to manifest that wonderful quality of divinity. To give one illustration, one day in Chicago, in March of 1894, the French opera singer Emma Cave went to see Swami Vivekananda. It was an extraordinary meeting in every way. She was in a state of extreme desperation because she had to pass through so many personal tragedies. The most recent being the sudden and untimely accidental death of her daughter by fire. She had become totally miserable. She couldn't bear the pain anymore. A friend suggested, why not she go and see Vivekananda? Swami Vivekananda's name was well known by that time. He was known as a healer of souls. This Madam Cave many times wanted to commit suicide. Several times she tried to drown herself in the lake. But some unseen power seemed to turn her steps toward the house where Swamiji was staying. She went there many times, but she went away without ringing the bell. She was coming and going away. Finally, one time she did ring, and in terrible agitation entered the room where Swami Vivekananda was sitting at his desk. Without raising his eyes, Swamiji said, "Come in, my child, don't be afraid. What a troubled atmosphere you have about you. Be calm. Be calm. It is essential." He told her things about herself which only she knew. And she was wondered how Swami, who did not know even her name, could know all these things. When she expressed amazement at this, Swamiji only smiled as though she were a child asking a foolish question. Lord Jesus did the same thing with the Samaritan woman at the well. Swami Vivekananda's advice to Kaveh was to be cheerful, not to brood on sorrow. The remedy of weakness is not brooding over weakness, but thinking of strength. What a fine teaching of Vivekananda. So, she told her to build up her health and to transmute her emotions into some form of eternal expression. We know from Kaveh's own account how this most exciting meeting with Vivekananda completely transformed her life. She was changed. She was changed immediately, and she was changed permanently. The effect was, she was extremely peaceful and happy. We should note that Swami Vivekananda did not find fault with her, did not call her a sinner, did not tell her to give up her operatic career. He put it in a different way. He tackled her problem in a different way. He told her to spiritualize her art. Swami Vivekananda could remove the bleeding wound of her grief and suffering, and he could lift her mind upward into joyfulness, not by words of consolation, not by abstract philosophy, but simply by the power of his overwhelming spirituality. Overwhelming spirituality. He put out the raging storm of her grief as water puts out fire. He did not lecture. He gave what was to be given to make her calm and peaceful. That is Swami Vivekananda. He gave the vision of God to all who could take it, as much as the small vessels of finite minds could hold. He poured out God in abundance, as a person pours out tea from a pot into cups. Swamiji poured God all over the world and everyone's head. Words were the smallest part of his message. All through his life, Swami Vivekananda manifested his heroic qualities. Personification of strength, courage and boldness. He used these qualities to fight against the demons of ignorance and prejudice. He slew them right and left wherever he met them. Swamiji came to conquer, and conquer the West he did, winning it for the establishment of the cultivation of Vedantic ideas from London to San Francisco. If you read Swami Vivekananda's works, you find his first salvo of shots in this conquest of the West was fired in the very first small handful of speeches he made before the Parliament of Religions at the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. Few and short as these speeches were, they yet laid down the essence of his whole message to the West. All the rest of his lectures and talks and books simply expanded upon and added details to the basic framework he laid down at the Parliament of Religions. It is thrilling experience to remember this most memorable event of 11th September 1893. He made his first speech at the Parliament. The first day, as he sat on the platform before the huge crowd, among the many other distinguished delegates representing all the major religions of the world, he felt very alone and very nervous. This was a new experience for him. He kept postponing his address, but finally he could do so no longer. So he rose and looked over the whole huge sea of faces outspread before him. And in that moment, something happened. As if a vast floodgate suddenly opened, and he was inundated by the ocean of the divine self manifested in the crowd of people, and he spontaneously addressed them with the words, "Sisters and brothers of America." And in that instant, the electric contact was made. And it was as if a bolt of lightning had shot between them, for the whole crowd rose as one man and cheered him for several minutes. He had hardly said anything, yet he had already conquered their hearts. Then the crowd hushed, and the words came like rain falling drop by drop, faster and faster on the parched earth. His message was so soothing, so much giving relief to the people. They were extremely happy. They were keep on looking at him, hearing on him. They didn't want to go away. They wanted to stay with him all the time. It was a brief talk, but it opened hearts deep buried under icy edges of griefs and fears and prejudices. He gave 2 quotations from Hindu scriptures, which revealed that religion is not for the purpose of destroying other men's beliefs, but for the purpose of finding the infinite divine unity underlying all apparent religious differences. He went on to say, sectarianism, bigotry, and fanaticism have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it with blood, destroyed civilizations. Swamiji is telling, but their time has come. And he said, I fervently hope that the bell that tolled this morning in honor of this convention may be the death knell of all fanaticism, of all persecutions, and of all uncharitable feelings between persons wending their way to the same goal. He thus sounded the main theme of his message, the unity of religions. This was the theme of his second talk too, a little parable about a frog in a well who met a frog from the sea and who couldn't believe the sea was bigger than his well. An apt symbol for religious and cultural bigotry. The third lecture, however, was much longer and laid down a magnificent systematic groundwork for his whole message, as it were. That we get to the essentials. This lecture was given on 19th September 1893, and it began by reminding the audience of what he had already said, that Hinduism is a vigorous and all-inclusive religion that has absorbed and assimilated all the separate sects that have existed in India from time immemorial. They all got merged into Hinduism, just as all the rivers, though run in different directions, they all get merged into ocean. This must certainly have been a new idea for his listeners at the Parliament, most of whom probably looked upon India as a land of competing sects and many jealous gods which were worshipped in the form of what the West called idols. To dispel these ideas, Swami Vivekananda said, from the high spiritual flights of the Vedanta philosophy, of which the latest discoveries of science seem like echoes, to the low ideas of idolatry, with its multifarious mythology, the agnosticism of the Buddhists and the atheism of the Jains, each and all have a place in the Hindu's religion. He also introduced the idea that there is no conflict between Hinduism and science. He said that the Hinduism is based on the revelations of the Vedas, that the Vedas are not a book but are immutable spiritual laws like the laws discovered by Western science. Here he is illustrating the meaning of divine laws revealed to the mystics by the Western belief in the universal and timeless laws discovered by science. Please note that Swamiji is not repudiating or belittling science, rather he is using it to show that science and religion are harmonious in that both are engaged in the discovery of immutable laws that exist beyond time and space. This was an appeal to the scientific West to accept Oriental religion on the same basis as it accepted science, experimental proof. This one deft stroke, he destroyed the Western idea that science and religion are necessarily at war with one another. And by introducing the idea that the Vedas are not a book but are the revelations of eternal truths, he made a distinction hitherto unknown in the West between mere book worship, which is bigotry, and the acceptance of a higher mystical revelation of truth, which is completely beyond all words and books and is open to all who truly seek it. When words are spun on the wheel of the eternal, they blaze on the skies of the mortal mind as more than words. They shine with a beauty which is truth. Thus was the Western belief in the Bible as revelation at once accepted and enlarged to infinity and taken out of all sectarian bigotry. For such an interpretation opens the doors to the acceptance of all religions as equally revelations of eternal divine truths. Swami Vivekananda solved another problem, the problem of why God seems to create some people happy and others miserable. This question people keep on asking. Even if they are answered, still there will be people who ask the same question. Swami Vivekananda has dealt with this subject very thoroughly. He said, we can't say that God does anything so arbitrary, that the inequalities in happiness and misery are due to our past actions in former lives, and that the soul, being immortal backwards in time as well as forwards, has been incarnated in various bodies for many lives in the past, and that its past actions performed under the veil of ignorance of its infinite and perfect nature are what produce in the present life the effects of happiness and misery. So he is explaining this problem through the doctrine of karma, which is one of the tenets of Hinduism. The soul alone produces its own sufferings and joys. It alone creates its own fate. So was the West introduced to the idea of karma and reincarnation, so important in Eastern religions, so long discredited and forgotten in the West. Apart from his lectures in the Parliament, he gave talks on the 4 yogas, Jnana Bhakti Karma and Raja Yoga. In developing his teachings on Karma Yoga and Raja Yoga, Swami Vivekananda brought out the fact that he was urging the active, practical, scientific West to be active, practical and scientific about religion, and treat religion like a science in order to produce practical results in experience by following the rules of practice laid down by the experts, the rishis. The path of Raja Yoga is a series of techniques. If you follow them correctly, it will produce certain specific results in spiritual experience inevitably, just like any experiment in science. He was not suggesting irresponsible tampering with higher experiences any more than scientists teach irresponsibility in the handling of chemicals, but rather he taught an exact scientific approach which uses specific means to produce specific results. Another important message was he taught renunciation and self-sacrifice. which are the basic foundations for the full development of spirituality. He laid before the West a plea for the sacrificial life in words of eloquence such as had never before been spoken by anyone. Speaking from his own personal experiences as a wandering monk all over India, in the towns, villages and jungles, he said, as a result of this intense, all-absorbing love comes the feeling of perfect self-surrender, the conviction that nothing that happens is against us. Then the loving soul is able to say, if pain comes, welcome pain. If a serpent comes, it will say, God ceases to distinguish between pleasure and pain insofar as they affect him who is practicing it. Why should our body be saved, say from a tiger? The tiger will thereby be pleased, and that is not altogether so very far from self-sacrifice and worship. Can you reach this realization of such an idea in which all sense of self is completely lost? It's a very dizzy height on the pinnacle of the religion of love, and few of this world have ever climbed to it. Blessed are they whose bodies get destroyed in the service of others. These are the words of Vivekananda. Swamiji himself was the best example of this ideal. He laid down his body in the service of mankind as a whole, but especially in the service of the West, for he spent his best years in the West and he spared no effort to bring to it the whole message of Vedanta as taught by his master, Sri Ramakrishna. His main message of the Upanishads was the oneness, Advaita, non-duality. So, the more we are able to understand this truth of non-dualism, the more we enjoy the supreme state of this non-dualism. Swamiji himself he was his own greatest message. He taught us of the West by his own example how to live in our own mechanized society. Swami Vivekananda, he meditated in streetcars, in trains, in railway stations, on lecture platforms, and in doing so showed us how to be yogis in the world of daily affairs. He rekindled in the West the flame of God knowledge. He brought the Guru power in his own person and in the persons of all the Ramakrishna Swamis who have followed, so that now here in the West we have that flame burning that has descended in unbroken succession from Vedic times down to the present. His person is like the ocean, at once powerful, illimitable, sublime, terrifying, and peaceful. The ocean has the power to send a strong ship to the bottom in one blow. But it also is a tender, gentle, all-sustaining nurse and mother, sweet, refreshing, and ineffably beautiful. In the sigh of the smallest wave, one can hear the whisper of infinitude. In Swamiji, as in Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, the fatherhood and motherhood of God are ceaselessly and endlessly manifested, so much so that even we who never saw him in the flesh, in this life at least, can never forget him, nor ever cease to think on him day or night, for we have come under his holy spell, where we shall remain forever. So let us try to concentrate upon his teachings. His teachings are like ocean. It runs into several volumes. He has dealt with all the yogas in detail. And his famous teachings are presented in practical Vedanta. So that is what we need in these modern times. To the extent we are practical in following the spiritual precepts, to that extent we practice Vedanta. So let us try to take these spiritual ideas into the heart and put them into practice with all sincerity and devotion. Each soul is potentially divine. Each soul is immortal. There is no death for the soul. Body dies. It has to die. Anything that is born, that dies. So let us concentrate on the nature of the true spirit and make our life blessed. With these words, I conclude my talk. Thank you. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunakto Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. May the Divine Lord protect us. May He nourish us. May we work in harmony with great vigor. May our study be illuminating and fruitful. May we not hate each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.